evening. Melanie, thank you very much for your introduction. As curator of the project Citizens and Subjects, a Dutch contribution to the 52nd Venice Biennale, currently on view in Venice, I would like to welcome you to this Utrecht opening lecture about the project, which is one of three parts of the project Citizens and Subjects, and accompanies the work of Aernout Mik in the Dutch Pavilion, titled Citizens and Subjects Aernout Mik, and the Critical Reader, as the second part of the Biennale, titled Citizens and Subjects, the Netherlands, for example, that was edited by Rosie Braidotti, Charles Escher, and myself. Our goal tonight, mine and Aernout, will be to discuss the conceptual grounds, conceptual foundations of the project, to summarize our successes, what we believe successes were, and our failures as well, to fulfill, to materialize the ideas that inspired the project. I'd like to ask you for your patience, to bear with me, because this is quite a special situation for me and Aernout as well, namely to address such varied audience coming from different fields, different areas of interest. However, I'm really happy that so many of you joined us. Before I try to embark on the journey of discussing the project Citizen Subject, I would like to pronounce a number of thank yous, if you allow me. I would like to, first of all, thank the Mondrian Foundation, who entrusted me as curator of this year's Dutch contribution to the Venice Biennale. That to me did mean a lot. I will describe it further in the lecture. But also for BAC, Basis for Actuele Kunst, that I run as artistic director. It's I dare to say, a great acknowledgement of its work in only 4 years of its existence. I would like to thank colleagues of BAC, great people who are always ready to rise above a call of duty and invest themselves immensely into the work we're doing together. I'd like to, of course, thank the University of Utrecht and Studium Generale for wonderful collaboration, and also for possibility to gather here in this OMA, in this wonderful space. And further, I'd like to thank City Council of Utrecht for, of course, financial contribution and trust they extend to us. Treaty of Utrecht, KF Heinfonds, and for developing this marathon, or estafette, one would say probably in Dutch, of lectures, seminars, conversations throughout the Netherlands and throughout autumn. I'd like to thank Van Abbe Museum in Eindhoven and Witte de Wit in Rotterdam. Just a technical comment, when we will have finished here, there will be a talk that will continue at BAC around 10 o'clock or shortly thereafter, that Witte de Wit organized within this series. That was the bus we were waiting for. There was a discussion on national representation that began during the journey and will continue at BAC later this evening. While it was a great honor to be invited to curate the Dutch Pavilion at the Venice Biennale, the oldest, biggest, and still the best attended large-scale international exhibition, perennial exhibition, one cannot deny the other side of the coin. Specifically, I'm thinking of the fact that Venice Biennale is traditionally based, and I quote Bruce Ferguson, on the very ideas of centrality and dominance on which spectacular imperial displays were originally founded. Although these principles and the authoritarian position of Biennale within the field of contemporary art are regularly scrutinized by allowing some voices from the margin. Think only about African Pavilion, however controversial case it was this year in Venice. Still, voices from the margins are allowed in. Yet it does stay an exercise of hegemony, as Henry Lefebvre would say it, and that on many grounds. I'd like to discuss that with you, because that was a dilemma that I faced with the invitation to curate the pavilion. I was not quite sure at that point how to weigh this reality against my belief in what art can do in society. And that's basically a belief of employing imagination, the most important tool I believe we have. Employing the imagination for society to provide a possibility to imagine things differently than they are in the society. That would mean, if I related it to the previous quote, that would mean to question this centrality and dominance and this exercise of hegemony that Venice Biennale represent. Can art actually, that is speculative and propositional, find its place within the framework of the late capitalist agenda, materialized mainly through the spectacle, entertainment, and ideology of consumerism on display in Venice? These were my questions. Now I confess up front, I do not know. I do not have any answer to these questions. However, what I do try is attempt at answering them. A quote of Aernout Mik, a great Brazilian artist, keeps encouraging me in doing so. He said, "From adversity we live." And to me, this is a kind of an empowering call for not being ashamed to move in this space, dialectical space between idealism and skepticism and back and forth. Now, when I began thinking about how to approach the Dutch Pavilion, there were a couple of projects I tried to remember from previous Venice Biennales, mainly since early 1990s, what was the time when I began visiting the biennial exhibitions. There were two particular projects that stuck in my mind. One was a project of Hans Hacke in the German Pavilion in 1993, who mainly the gesture of him smashing the marble floor of the German Pavilion under the huge title Germania, and having the sounds of people walking on the smashed floor amplified with very clear connections to Germany in the 30s. I will not go too deep into the project, but for those who do not know it, and I have to try to find some information, it's one of the most beautiful poetic and political projects I've encountered. Another project that was very interesting and important for me was the project in 2003 in the Spanish Pavilion. Santiago Sierra, a Spanish artist, what he did, he blocked the entrance to the pavilion, so nobody could enter it unless you made an effort, walked around the pavilion to the back door, and there you would encounter a policeman who would ask you to show him a passport. And only if you were a Spanish citizen you were allowed in. And I will never forget a moment where I was trying to enter the pavilion with the director of the Biennale, the whole exhibition. And we were not allowed in because he had an American passport and I had a Slovak passport. And the gentleman next to me would be saying, "Do you know who I am?" And the answer of the policeman would be, "I know, you're an American citizen." Now, one can interpret these projects in numerous ways. There is something that connects them, and that stuck in my mind as something very important. These two projects treated the national pavilions not as just neutral, any exhibition site. They treated these pavilions for what they were, national pavilions. And this is what inspired me to look at the Dutch Pavilion as a Dutch pavilion and acknowledge that it already, before doing anything in there, it is loaded with meanings that one in the art world can actually grasp and try to work further with. So what's very important to say and slightly correct the introduction to this lecture, to deal with the notion of nation state didn't really mean to deal directly with Dutch nationalism. We didn't intend to deal with the Dutch pavilion as a pavilion to discuss issues that are at play in the Netherlands only. We tried to look at the notion, the concept of nation today. And we try to place somehow also our experience that's really established through international communication, through exhibiting internationally. Our experience, this experience superimposed on this request of being a national representation of a country. In the midst of this paradox, it was, I believe a year ago, I went to Aernout Mik with the invitation. At that point, Aernout was working on a work called Training Ground. I'm checking what's behind me. And just a small comment. You notice the chandelier. I hope you find a right angle to look at the work. Now, Aernout was developing a work called Training Ground for completely another context, for a completely different exhibition. But looking at it, it became quickly clear throughout the discussions that this is something we want to use as our starting point, as a starting point for a larger, multifaceted project. Training Ground, is the title of the work, is a 2-channel video installation that depicts policemen somewhere in the West, in the midst of a training exercise. They're learning how to deal with people who either illegally cross borders or are moving persons for years. The work in some way reconstructs the procedures of the training, in which participants are taught different strategies for handling the arrest of illegal refugees, and how to apply various techniques of law enforcement. The refugees, quote unquote, playing a role in the training are clearly stand-ins hired for the job. And we see them in the beginning of the film mixing in a relaxed manner with the police, quote unquote. Nearby, a group of truck drivers hang around their vehicles observing the training site. At the beginning, the atmosphere is rather fluid, with the hierarchies of power and specific roles on the scene clearly defined. At some point, however, the pace of the whole work changes entirely as one of the refugees unexpectedly runs away from the scene, and the energy on the set changes quite quickly. And we as viewers become quite uncertain about whether this is still a fiction or is this a real situation. Now what happened later on is that even the roles between refugees and policemen are swapped. And what we see on the scenes does no longer correspond to conventions we know. Some refugees take over power temporarily, the policemen exercise arrest techniques on each other, and even some drivers are captured, arrested. At a certain point, some of the refugees and policemen enter a seemingly inexplicable state of trance or delirium, while others just continue to perform their roles and predictable patterns of behavior. Here, Aernout smuggles in a kind of citation from a well-known 1950s movie, ethnographic film by Jagu entitled Le Maître Fou, Headmasters. This anthropological study investigates a concrete case of a response to colonial repression in Africa, pointing to a religious sect known as the Hauka cult, whose members claim to be possessed by colonial figures of power. In a strange annual ceremonial ritual, the group of men engages in a confrontation with the past by means of reenactment and mimicking the ways in which they have been treated by the colonizers. The Hauka is known as one of the critical instances of cultural resistance in colonial Africa, and at the same time it is an example that contains a strong critique of modern Europe. Aernout's training ground rests on similar principles of critique of contemporary Europe. Or rather, I should perhaps use somewhat simplified term, the West. Now, he brings to the fore an issue of major social and political consequence today. Immigration. Acknowledging this problem is a riddle difficult to resolve, yet it is defining for our age. It is of particular interest that the method he chooses to articulate these concerns is to stage the fictional training or exercise situation I mentioned earlier. If we look up a basic definition of a training, it is the acquisition of knowledge, skills, and competencies to establish or improve performance in particular areas. Although aimed at acquiring the ability to perform and in military or police use to survive, the training situation is clearly not for real. It is just as if. In training ground, and I would like you to remember for conclusions to draw later, Aernout actually goes even further. What he's showing, it's not a training, not only that. What he's showing is actually playing out a training. So through numerous shifts, the artist distances himself from a representation of what we know in reality and about reality. Through infecting the scenes with irrationality, bringing in the idea of spirit possession in our times, and dissolving clear lines between who is who, it soon becomes clear the work enacts a game about a non-existent situation. Yet it certainly is a situation that plays out in our imagination, which suggests us a question about how we conceive of this world and the power relations that govern it. In 1994, philosopher George Agamben wrote a brief study titled We Refugees, expanding on an essay by Hannah Arendt that she wrote in the early 40s under the same title, We Refugees. He takes Arendt's statement that refugees expelled from one country to the next represent the avant-garde of their people, as well as Arendt's suggestion that the condition of the refugee or the individual without a country is the paradigm of a new historical consciousness as a starting point, and writes, quote, "It is worth reflecting on the sense of this analysis which today, precisely 50 years later, has not lost any of its currency. Not only does the problem arise with the same urgency, both in Europe and elsewhere, but also in the context of the inexorable decline of the nation-state and the general corrosion of traditional legal political categories, the refugee is perhaps the only imaginable figure of the people in our day. At least until the process of the dissolution of the nation-state and its sovereignty has come to an end, the refugee is the sole category in which it is possible today to perceive the forms and limits of a political community to come. Indeed, it may be that if we want to be equal to the absolutely novel tasks that face us, we will have to abandon without misgivings the basic concepts in which we have represented political subjects up to now, men and citizens with their rights, but also the sovereign people, the worker, etc. And to reconstruct our political philosophy, beginning with this unique figure." Now I'll return to Agamben later, but I would simply like to point out that already in this brief study from early 90s, a number of his basic concepts that certainly many of you know, such as bare life and the state of exception and homo sacer, notions that are often mentioned in critical analysis of Aernout Mik's work, already in this work they are all outlined. I would argue that in Agamben's We Refugees, one can find a number of corresponding issues to what the work Training Ground points at. And it would be my proposition to understand them alongside each other as two parallel texts. The main message that Agamben articulates here is that refugees no longer represent individual cases, but rather a mass phenomenon. And that the refugee, meant par excellence, is he or she who needs to be recognized in every citizen. only when, I quote, the citizen will have learned to acknowledge the refugee that he himself is, the man's political survival today is imaginable. For it is the figure of refugee who teaches us a possibility to unhinge a burst from nation. It is he who breaks up the identity between man and citizen, between nativity and nationality, and thus throws into crisis the original fiction of sovereignty. To echo training ground, I hope you allow me one more quick, brief quote of Agamben. He remarks that single states have proven to be absolutely incapable, not only of resolving the problem, but also simply of dealing with it adequately. In this way, the entire question was transferred into the hands of the police and of humanitarian organizations. Now, to complicate things even further, in a public lecture given at Bach earlier this year, and out of the great minds of our time, Sarat Maharaj, art theorist and thinker, unexpectedly engaged in a polemics, in a dispute with Agamben's statement about the refugee as the paradigm figure of our age. Today, he said, it no longer is the refugee, but rather a figure of the terrorist that is emblematic for our times. While Arendt and Agamben draw on the experience of the 20th century that is caught in a particular model of migration, of difference, and of the production of consciousness, according to Maharaj, as of today we have largely proven ourselves unable to live with difference. And that is precisely where our position mirrors that of a terrorist. While these provocative ideas certainly deserve some further examination, and thinking on our part mainly the question if one can empathize or identify with the figure of terrorist in a similar way that it is possible with Arendt and Agamben's refugee. I would like us to return to Arnold's work and have a look at how similar considerations play out in the second work in the installations of citizen subjects in the Dutch Pavilion, the two-channel video Convergencies. Those who are familiar with Arnold's previous work notice certain differences immediately when they enter the pavilion, because the word Convergencies is installed off the ground, not on the ground, not on the floor as it is customary in his installation. It's installed at the height of the visitor's eyes. In this way, Arnold signals or suggests that the origin of the images is foreign to the images he produces himself. Convergencies consists of editing existing found footage he collected from commercial media agencies and various other sources like AP Archive, Reuters, and ITN source. He first attempted to locate documentary footage from situations depicting the training of policemen in preparation for an encounter with refugees, as if trying to find out to which extent his previous work mirrored reality, a sort of reality check, if you will. When consulting the available material, however, he soon changed his mind and had the idea to make training reappear as an element in this work, but within a much larger field that appeared before him, the field of preparation for disasters or crises of various kinds. This is when questions of immigration, legal or illegal, began to mingle with issues of terrorism in Arnold's work. Now, what does the artist show there? In numerous archives, he sought out film material that in various ways showed how we, members of Western society, prepare ourselves for the potential dangers to come. Arnold himself speaks about this in a conversation published in the Critical Reader. I quote, "The artificiality of those trainings interests me. We have this instant urge to be ready to prepare for the future, to anticipate or know even what it will be and how to react. And this imagination of what is awaiting us is largely informed by fear. Complex as it is, it also seems that in the very idea of training or preparation, a desire is embedded for things to happen in order to be able to employ the skills acquired. Does it not make things more likely to happen?" The footage that he chose after extensive research originates from different sources, such as anti-terrorism or riot exercises, as well as from unclear, ambiguous situations in which police are involved, from military to police to public transport to detention centers to public parks to schools, etc. But mostly spreading from one situation to another and overlapping so that the boundaries between them become blurred. Yet what we really see are not the key moments that the commercial agency will be selling to commercial television. It's not showing main narrative or foremost action. Aernout selects images just before or after the main account of activity. He's, for example, grateful for mistakes that cameramen make. If they, for example, have the camera run after it all happens. And that's precisely the material he uses when the intensity of the stage action fades out from the scenes in its aftermath. The flow of images he shows us lacks climax or excitement. The images do not form a meaning that their sum would produce. They are not really telling much, their slow pace requires patience, their repetition asks for tolerance. Despite the insistent endurance of these, let's call them non-happenings or non-events, one needs the 10-second blackouts in between the chapters in order to recover from the realization how actually to us normal this all has become. And that these preparations are all undertaken on our behalf, that is to say, in our name. I'm talking about the realization that all this contributes to processes of normalization within a social landscape that is created through rhetoric of fear, standardization and control, as well as mechanisms of discipline required in the name of our security. That becomes even more apparent when Aernout now and then smuggles in footage from real such situations. Situations in which the skills acquired through training and exercise are put into the service of our safety. In these moments, we as viewers seem to have no other option but to watch, perplexed at how far it all went with our approval. This is a kind of approval we have extended through fear, mainly fear of immigration and terrorism, as many claim. And it is readily sized up in political discourses that perpetuate the very fear they claim to combat in the name of our protection. In return, we presented the state as our inevitable new normal, our new everyday. You probably would agree that within the flow of images you were looking at, it is not always clear whether they are authentic documentary, however questionable the statement can be, or enacted, whether the events or non-events represent an exercise or point at reality. And if I mentioned earlier that Aernout wants to assure us these are not his images, the similarity between the staged material, his images from his works, and what one would refer to as documentary is quite striking. The fictional and documentary materials do not form a contrasting experience. They rather create a continuum complicating the work, even further. All throughout the work of convergences, which we unfortunately cannot see here in total, these are all long pieces. The architectural element of a portal cabin, a prefabricated container used for the deportation or detention of illegal refugee, repeatedly reappears. It's a place, just to return us to Agamben for a while, as Agamben has suggested, when it comes to the subject of the detention center or camp, where violent act of stripping, an act of the removal of basic human rights, is performed. Probably recognize now that central station. In the next word, I'd like to quickly discuss with you a third work in the pavilion titled Mock-up, the video installation, full-screen video installation. Aernout brought this particular architectural mainstay of the documentary scenes onto a set. He built the detention center on the grounds of the largest urban military exercise site in Europe. Guess where? North of Groningen in the Netherlands, called Hlavajova. This is a place where military troops prepare for missions in urban environments. You could imagine it as a ghost town, something of a city that is at the same time not yet finished but already in decay. The village, Hlavajova, contains over 100 exercise objects, as they refer to them: a school, a bakery, a station, a city council, even a recycling bins, and a green telephone booth that I don't see anywhere else in the Netherlands, except for that village. Amidst this military exercise landscape, Aernout constructed a camp, a detention center from prefabricated, furnished container units. This is where a large group of actors, some dressed as detainees, some as guards, policemen, firemen, or members of medical teams, rehearse time and time again how to evacuate the building in case of fire. What appears as an exercise of training again unfolds through repetition, the building of a routine, the drill of the same line of action, and customized response to the danger, creating the groove, developing a convention, establishing a habit. It is again a process of normalization through repetition that Aernout enacts, or, in his own words, an over-intensification of the same, so that what appeared exceptional and peculiar before becomes ordinary, customary, and even banal. Yet this excess of sameness also clears the ground for potential difference, as Aernout says. In the particular case of Mock-up, some half of the cast consists of young people, teenagers roughly between age 12 to 16, who start off following the instructions and the drill in an orderly and obedient manner, yet at some point discover the ridiculousness of it all, the strangeness of how we conceive of this world, and they begin to question the instructions. They simply begin to break the rules. First by carefully testing the possibilities, and then by openly disturbing the rehearsal, infecting it with disobedience and the refusal to comply with the way things are. They move away from stereotypes and, through their own actions, towards something more complicated, filling the scenes with the irrational, the foolish, bizarre, spontaneous, some would say unwise or risky even. These interventions, which cause implosions, disruptions, and confusions, infect, or should I rather say, inspire the rest of the cast to simply start doing the same. As Aernout had said about such moments, by the virtue of having this excess implode or transgress onto another level, it no longer coincides with the possibilities we know or can rationally account for. In this newly created field, there's no other option left for us but to speculate about what else this all could become and start again. That said, if by my attempts to describe the three video works I made you believe that there is a particular concrete narrative to these works, this is perhaps a moment I would like to set the record straight. To the extent that we argued about the lack or absence even of narrative within the documentary work Convergences, you may recall that I spoke about non-happenings or non-events. So much it is true with this fictional work. Aernout's videos unfold rather as disquieting movements stripped of the comforting and logic-providing features of narrative, dialogue, and characterization. His work actually could be characterized as a flow of inaction, of insignificant images that through repetition, mimesis, reenactment, retool, and irrational access gain a disturbing quality that throws reasonable doubt not upon the figures on the scene, but upon ourselves. Let's have a look at how Aernout works. In his films, Aernout works with large numbers of both professional and amateur actors, who are assigned roles on the performance or film set, but are provided with neither a script nor scenario, nor are they given a possibility to rehearse the scenes. What precedes filming is a presentation of the plan Aernout has in mind, and a brief discussion about the distinct roles groups of people have. Groups that could be distinguished mainly by clothing they are provided with. What strikingly comes to the fore in Aernout's work is that there aren't individuals, but rather the actors in their groups are presented as generic figures or broad social types, signified by the dress code, physiognomy, and particular behavior. During the course of filming, and I feel privileged to have experienced this firsthand in Mannheim, it was my strong feeling that while the situation on the set could not be said to be out of control entirely, it did not seem to be under control either. And Aernout describes it similarly as being in the position of desperately trying to maintain an overview of the actors' projections and assumptions that organize their actions, while at the same time losing it. Writers Jennifer Fisher and Jim Drobnik say that, I quote, a directorial relationship best describes Mik's involvement in arranging and coordinating the groups of individuals that comprise his installations and videos. Hiring actors, arranging them into shifts, paying them by the hour, industry wages of course, and providing a list of instructions believes the spectacle orientation often associated with the directorial mode of performance. Mik coordinates people as if they were workers or tradespeople, organizing them as if he were a foreman and they a construction crew, or more precisely, a performer managing the construction site, unquote. One thing I would like to underline in this discussion is a shift that takes place in Aernout's work, having to do with the individual fading from a view, replaced in a sense by the dynamic of a group. Critic and curator Ralph Rogoff, in an article titled "A Man of the Crowd Wrote," I quote, "Mik's work presents images of groups and packs of people, and in some instances animals as well. None of these mute figures is ever delineated as a distinct character or psychological subject. Instead, Mik's camera regards them all with a leveling gaze that diminishes and blurs their difference, leaving us to consider the collective identity of those who, under different conditions, might appear as discrete individuals. The entity of the crowd, however, is not merely the ostensible subject of Mik's video installations. Everything about his work, in fact, its formal language, temporal structure, and installation strategy, appears to be intimately, if indirectly, connected with the aesthetic character of crowds, in such a way that it reflects back on and addresses the viewer's own status as a member of a multitude. On numerous levels, in other words, Mik's art engages us through the lens of a communal subjectivity, a perspective that most presentations of contemporary art seem calculated to render invisible, if not to obliterate, unquote. And to support this idea of communality or sociality, if you will, even further, let's recall the aesthetic means Aernout employs. While documentary material in Convergences is installed off the ground, his fictional works, both Training Ground and Mock-up that are presented on the floor and in almost human scale. In other words, in such a way that one feels included, involved even in the work, and thus also directly implicated in the critique that the works make about our world. The three video works that I have just spoken about, Training Ground, Convergences, and Mock-up, are installed next to each other in the pavilion. However autonomous the works are, they revolve around similar issues on an abstract level. According to Aernout, quote, "Embedded in the spatial installation, they together have a capacity to form a continuous loop, a cyclical pattern of fear and violence, constantly feeding each other, but brought to a point where it either exhausts itself or transgresses into other directions," unquote. The spatial installation Aernout speaks about is the detention center. He partially transform the pavilion into. The experience of partaking in the world in a state of exception, as Agamben calls it, thus begins at the point of entering the building built by Gerrit Rietveld, extended as it is through prefabricated and furnished containers. It at once becomes clear that the Dutch pavilion at this year's Venice Biennale is not necessarily about the singularities of issues such as migration, terrorism, or detention, but rather about a complex situation we find ourselves in the so-called West. It addresses the contemporary world as a place in which the detention center is no longer a mere device for the production and containment of illegality in the West, but is rather emblematic of the alarming condition we have ensnared ourselves in. We are held in confinement by our fear, a situation that has become our new normal. The work shows that the logic of domination that functions in the camp de facto operates in other social spaces, and that it is really diffused throughout the comprehensive structure of the Western society. Yet, besides articulating a precise analysis of this condition throughout the installation, Mik simultaneously suggests something very important, that it is in art where subjection to however difficult conditions can be confronted with joyous moments of liberation, and where the borders between confinement and freedom are not as fixed as we have to come to believe. But what's art got to do with all this? What's art got to do with such a condition? It is of utmost importance to me, Aernout says, that an artwork deepens one's doubt about and within the situation under discussion, especially when entering the realm of the social or the political, and that it by no means offers a false pretense that it knows where the problems reside, who is to blame for them, or how to resolve them. What my work does suggest, however, is that solutions do exist. In the beginning of this lecture, I mentioned my belief in the capacity of art to imagine things otherwise than they are. And Aernout's suggestion provides a much more nuanced articulation of this. It brings us to a discussion about the late capitalist condition in which we are ensnared, defined by fear stemming from various threats, real or imagined. A situation in which criticism and oppositional voices are consumed as just another commodity. Does it really matter what artwork imagines? Well, it might not matter if the art attempts to be moralistic or perpetuate cliches, or if it's offering clear-cut solutions. What Aernout's work does do differently is to suggest that a way out of the situation is possible. He does this in two ways. One is through the venue of collectivity, sociality, or collective creativity that he consistently examines in all facets of his work, from staging groups and never articulating the positions of the individuals, to installing works in such a way that we, the viewers, willingly or not, become the work's participants. The second venue is the way he infects the work with the irrational, undermining the logical foundations of liberal democracy. In this way, the sacredness of the individual and the rational, two pillars of the current logic of capitalism, are put under question. I would like to make an open proposition for our further discussion, to which Aernout and I look forward to. When it comes to the question of what art has got to do with society, what if we excluded two terms from our discussions and theoretical considerations? I would like to suggest to dismiss the terms political art and engaged art. They have certainly polluted our talks and confused our arguments with mistaken and vague interpretations that devalue art, rendering it subservient to politics. Let's get rid of these two terms. political art and engage art. After all, if these terms really had any meaning, we would probably be able to define what apolitical or unengaged art is. I even cannot pronounce unengaged art is. I would know. What if we instead take up the proposition of political thinker and theorist Chantal Mouffe and speak about these practices as critical art practices, understanding it not as a criticism, not as a critique, but as criticality towards the assumed truth about who we are and what our place in the public sphere is. What I mean by criticality is close to what Irit Rogov, art theorist, has suggested, namely that it means inhabiting a problem rather than analyzing it from a distance, and doing so from an unstable ground of actual embeddedness. For if there is any requirement of art, it is precisely this, to be public, to be concerned with public matters. In the words of artist Lawrence Wiener, which appeared in the reader of the project, art isn't about you, it is not about me, it is about we. Thank you.